Welcome to Lecture 5, which falls on week 6. This is part 1 of 2 of the 5th lecture. And you'll see here that I'm covering the National Response Framework, or the NRF, and Incident Command. And for those that pay close attention to the course outline, I have opted to deviate slightly because I'm choosing to cover the NRF in this lecture, and I'm pushing the ESFs, the Emergency Support Functions, to the next lecture. As I reviewed the material, it seemed this was a more logical sequence in my mind. And that said, you will see them in the opposite order, though, in the independent study courses. Additionally, I indicated on the course outline that I would be covering EOCs in this section, but I'm pretty sure we've covered that sufficiently, so I'll be giving additional time instead to critical infrastructure, and that'll be in part 2. As it relates to the NRF, I have created this chart to help you assimilate the concepts. Topping the chart is our overall effort to comply with the President's directive. You'll recall PPD 8, the Presidential Policy Directive 8, in that lecture that the document most simply is about national preparedness. And in order to be prepared as a nation for emergencies, there is the National Incident Management System, NIMS, which was also discussed last time. As its name indicates, NIMS is a system. It provides the template for the management of incidents, regardless of cause, size, location, or complexity. This template establishes the structure, the concepts, principles, processes, and language for the effective employment of capabilities, or, of course, as you're familiar now, core capabilities. Employing those nationally, regardless of where those capabilities reside, whether those are federal, state, tribal, local jurisdictions, or maybe even private sector, or what's referred to as NGOs, non-governmental organizations. So NIMS is a template that facilitates consistency among all levels of responders. The federal government does not direct other jurisdictions how to deploy their resources, only in what format they should do it. And this was covered largely last week. Now, the NRF is a guide to how the nation conducts all hazards response. The NRF is a general set of principles by which federal resources participate. When special circumstances exist where the federal government needs to exercise a larger role, so maybe federal assets themselves are at risk, or it's a catastrophic incident where a state would be overwhelmed and require significant support. The NRF provides the structure and mechanisms for national level policy and operational direction for incident management. The NRF is applicable to all federal departments and agencies that participate in operations requiring a coordinated federal response. The NIMS template applies to everyone, and the NRF describes how the feds will get involved. So the two are complementary, and you'll see the different elements working together when we cover the emergency support functions next week. While the NRF guides how federal resources will respond to an emergency, there is not a formal trigger mechanism that puts it into action. So as a framework, it's always in place. And just like NIMS, it's flexible and scalable. Also, like NIMS, the NRF puts particular emphasis on that concept of whole community, a whole community response, and leverages the same core capabilities as those listed as part of NIMS. And while the NRF is directed towards national assets and federal agencies, the expectation is that emergency managers at all levels will utilize the principles established in the NRF to provide a more unified response to crises. And that's why in the diagram the NRF was separated, but it's still situated next to NIMS. At this point, let's return to the scene of the crisis. We're going to move from the lofty strategic discussion of national preparedness as a whole, continue our descent through the template of NIMS and into the tactical level of incident management. So we're going to talk about the Incident Command System, ICS. ICS takes place in the field and oftentimes in really cool places such as this mobile command post. Anytime you've driven by one of these things when it's deployed in the field, you've probably wondered what's going on in there. Well, ICS is going on in there. For some that have military, law enforcement, and fire department backgrounds, this may be elementary, and for others it may be fresh ground. In any case, if you're going to enter the world of emergency management, you'll be working closely with incident commanders that are used to managing emergencies in the field. It's crucial that you understand the basic operational pieces to the ICS puzzle. And besides, much of it applies to the EOC, which of course often becomes the emergency manager's home base. As indicated by the arrow in the earlier slide, ICS is an extension of the incident management system. Therein lies tip number 1. ICS and NIMS are not synonymous. In the field, you will hear some people refer to them interchangeably. You, of course, as the highly educated and deftly skilled emergency manager, will know that they are, in fact, different. I'm confident you will recall from the last lecture that NIMS provides a, quote, set of preparedness concepts, end quote. Well, one of those very concepts is ICS. ICS is an emergency management model for command, management, and coordination of a response operation. It's based on features and principles that have been successful in managing crises from wildfires to terrorism. ICS is used on pre-planned events, natural disasters, acts of terrorism, etc. And ICS is the everyday model and language of today's first responders. When I say model, here it is. The basic organizational structure of ICS. It is not important to memorize the entire thing. As I mentioned, it's flexible and scalable, so different areas are needed based on the type of disaster. One example is the last section, finance and administration, right over here. Most events do not require this section unless it's a prolonged incident that will require assets that exceed its own jurisdiction. For that matter, the everyday emergencies are handled largely with the operations section, along with a few bits and pieces from the others as needed. Conversely, it is possible to expand it beyond this basic structure that you see here. It's not uncommon for law enforcement agencies to add an intelligence section. Consider the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013. Besides the normal response that includes tending to the injured, evacuating streets, crowd control, etc., they had to initiate a manhunt. The intelligence section would be where the investigative function of this emergency would be added, and it would have its own organizational staffing needs. So again, while you don't need to memorize this whole thing, it is essential that you know the main positions, known as command and general staff. In typical fashion, of course, the short way to reference those positions is C and G staff. The C and G staff include incident commander, operations section chief, planning section chief or plans section chief, the logistics section chief, and the finance and administration section chief. If you're exposed to ICS, you are likely among those that are actually solving the problem in the field. If you would like to be taken seriously around those people, it's important that you're familiar with terminology used in that environment. Below are 3 terms that are easily misunderstood or misapplied. They are chain of command, which of course, key to success is always to follow your chain of command. Unity of command. If there is to be success at any emergency, each person should only be responsible to report to one boss. And then unified command, which allows incident commanders from multiple disciplines to manage an incident together. In other words, it's a cooperative effort under unified command. For instance, a while back when there was some flooding and roadways were affected and health and safety issues due to possible hazardous waste exposures were involved and city infrastructure was overwhelmed. There had to be representatives from police, from fire, and from public works involved in the command of the incident like that. And together, them working together represents unified command. And of course, there are plenty of other terms within ICS, but these are some to just kind of get you started on the right foot. So let me demonstrate these terms here going back to our ICS organizational chart. So chain of command would mean that perhaps the resource unit leader then has to report to somebody. Following his chain of command, he would report to the plan section chief, who would then report to the incident commander. That is the chain of command. As it relates to unity of command, the resource unit leader reports only to one person. In other words, the resource unit leader doesn't report to the plan section chief and to the logistics section chief. That would not be unity of command. There's only one person that each person reports to. And then ultimately, the idea of unified command means that the incident might be of such a nature that it requires both police and fire to kind of be running the thing jointly. And in that case, you have unified command.